everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. I'm just going to start by making some introductions. So my name is John Harrison, and with me today I have my colleague Anil and Mahadev. I'll be doing most of the presenting today, and Anil will be helping us out with questions and general logistics as we go through. This is a live session today, which is always good fun. And really, because it's live, we really would like to get some questions and feedback from yourselves as we go along. So in the GoToWebinar panels, you should see that there's a question panel. Please do feel free to enter questions into there. We'll try answer them as we go along. If there's anything that's a bit more detailed, a bit more in depth, we may need to come back to you on that one. But otherwise, please do type your questions in, and we'll try our best to get through those for you. Okay, as I mentioned, we have a really good turnout for this one, so I'm hoping it's going to be useful for everyone. And as you probably saw, the session really is all around JSON and the support we have for JSON within EOS Studio. Before we get into that, for those of you who are new to EOS Studio, I'm just going to do a couple of quick overview slides and introductory slides. They won't take long, and then we'll get into the more detailed JSON side of things. So I think for EOS Studio, like most organizations and most solutions and tools, we have a little bit of a mission. Let me just kind of paraphrase this. EOS Studio is our data modeling solution. It has been out in the industry for quite some time now, so it's very well known, used by a lot of organizations in a lot of different industries as well. And what it's especially good at really is working in an enterprise environment. And by that I mean being able to handle large and complex data models, but also allowing for team working and the ability to share the models, version control them, and so on. That's not a big focus for us today, but we'll touch on a few of those points as we go along. And just a quick name check on some of the parts of EOS Studio and some of the things that we will go through in the session. So EOS Studio is made up of a few different components. The one that we're going to really focus on in the session is EOS Studio Data Architect. This is the modeling tool itself. So this is where we can do our logical modeling, our physical modeling. We'll see how we can do that with imports from JSON and generation of JSON code as well. We can also connect to other data sources to do reverse engineering and lots of other good stuff. And then really at the back end, I'm not going to get into the details of this, but we have got a repository and a web portal which allows you to manage the data models, to kind of share them, and also to publish them out to a wider audience as well, for people who just want to have a read-only view or read-only access to the data models themselves. So very comprehensive tool set. We're going to really focus on the modeling capabilities. And just before we dive into that, again, just a couple of things really that we're seeing talked about a lot in the industry at the moment, and some things that keep coming up again for us. It's really the concept, which is not new, but the concept of enterprise data modeling and what does that mean. And of course, like all these phrases, it can mean slightly different things to different people. But the feedback we're getting really is people are looking to be a little bit more organized, a little bit in control of how they're doing things. So if we start to build up something like an enterprise data model, what does that actually mean? I'm going to build some of these up on the screen, and then we'll jump back and talk through some of them. So typically,
hey John, sorry to interrupt. You are sharing your screen, right? I mean, I'm seeing it, but some of the attendees.
Okay. It does say that I'm sharing it, and in my audience preview view, it is saying that it's being broadcast.
Okay.
Yep, we're all set.
Yeah. All good. Thank you.
All good. Yeah. Okay. Cool. No problem. So let's just get back to where we were. So an enterprise data model. Often this will start off with the idea of being able to represent something at a fairly conceptual level. And what we mean by that is, what does something really mean to the business? How does the business look at things like its different domains or its different business areas? How do they break those down? How do they map into to different parts of the company in terms of data assets, databases, data warehouses, whatever else they may be? And from there, what often then happens is it gets expanded out to provide a slightly more detailed view, which is often termed the enterprise logical model. And this is really where some of the cool features that you'll find in modeling solutions tend to start to benefit you. Because to some extent, if we're looking at a conceptual model, and if we're just representing parts of the business like on this screen here, we can kind of do that, in just a visualization tool. But when we start to try and understand and add information into the data model, so actually looking at what does a customer mean, how do we identify customers in terms of when we store them, are they related to orders, and what are we storing in order information? How does that all come together? So that's when we really want to start understanding things from a data model perspective. And what's also important, of course, as well, is if we are starting to try and build this kind of model for this kind of approach, is to have some way of being able to map across them so that we can easily see when we're talking about a customer at a conceptual level, well, how does that relate back to my enterprise logical model? And also we'll see in a moment, it's also very important as to how it relates through to more detailed information as well. So really with a high-level enterprise data model, we're looking at trying to create something that's easy to understand, that shows us really how the business works, but also something that we can then start to build on, perhaps to look at how we can reuse and standardize some of these definitions that we're working with. So if we now start drilling into a bit more detail from a data model perspective, and again, I'm going to build these up, I think, first, and then we'll start talking about them. The reality is, of course, that underneath the enterprise logical model, at some point, we're going to end up with a set of data assets. And the data asset could be a relational database system, something that's running on SQL Server or Oracle. It could be a data asset that's stored in JSON in a hierarchical format. Obviously, we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Or it could be something else. It could actually be a packaged product, like off-the-shelf solutions. We're going to be storing information in all these different data asset areas. And what we're really looking to do with the concept of an enterprise model or enterprise modeling is a way in which we're able to bring these together, understand the mappings between them, and as we said, really benefit from that by being able to standardize definitions, reuse them, and so on. And the physical model generally is something that will map fairly one-to-one or fairly directly to the data asset itself. So it'll have tables for a database, it'll have fields, etc., for a JSON asset, and depending on how the packaged software is presenting and storing information, it may be in something else completely. And from the physical model, it's good to be able to, again, further abstract that to really the logical layer, but it's still important then to be able to map these up back into our enterprise representation. Okay. And then furthermore, what we're starting to see becoming increasingly important is the ability to understand how these things then relate to another layer. And what do we mean by that? Well, often now organizations are looking at how these things relate more directly to the business, because even an enterprise logical model can be quite a technical way of presenting information. how do we describe what something such as a customer really just means to the business in a very succinct, easy to understand, and non-technical way. And this is where you might see reference to some tool sets like Calibra or Microsoft Purview or Elation, which are really aiming as a data catalog to bring together not just definitions from a technical perspective, but definitions from a business perspective as well. So we may be looking then at how we actually wrap things like our business glossaries with business term definitions and map those through to how things are actually defined and potentially even implemented further down in that physical layer. So that was just really a little bit of background in terms of data modeling itself and kind of where we're at with that and what we're looking to try and support effectively with EOS Studio. For the rest of the time, we're going to focus a bit more on the hierarchical capabilities of EOS Studio. Before I do that, though, I am just going to ask you, if you don't mind, to respond to a couple of little quick questions that I've prepared. So GoToWebinar allows us to put together these little polls. So the first thing that's always interesting for us to understand is just to get a little bit of a feeling for the people attending this type of webinar. I'm suspecting a lot of you probably perhaps are using EOS Studio already, but if you're using EOS Studio or other modeling tools, if you don't mind just clicking the boxes in the poll once that comes through, and we'll just leave it open for about 10 or 15 seconds. Thanks, it's all coming through. Yeah, there's a big percentage of people using EOS Studio, as this is an EOS Studio webinar. But yeah, there's a bit of a mix of others in there as well. So yeah, that's good to see. I'm going to close that one down. I've just got a couple more of these really quickly. Again, I'm guessing the answer to this one is going to be pretty skewed towards the top, and that is in terms of supporting a standard like JSON. How important is this to your organization at the moment? Are you using JSON very extensively in terms of sharing information as a common definition between different systems? Or is it something that's not in use just yet, but maybe we're considering, or it's not really that important to us? Again, it just gives us a little bit of feedback in terms of the technologies and also the topics that we cover on these webinars, to be honest, as well. Helps us to tailor those a little bit. Yeah, so about 60% coming through there saying it's very important, 20+% saying it's important as well. So, and hopefully we'll show the others in the categories at the end there as to why they might want to consider it a little bit more as we go through. I promised the last couple here. Other thing that's always interesting for us as well is often you hear a lot of terms around technology and I'm building something using the latest and greatest thing that's out there. So again, just a little bit of feedback from yourselves if you don't mind. Are you using things like a lakehouse medallion approach? Are you more data vault with hubs, satellites? You should be able to click multiple of these because I realize that you might have a mixture of things in there as well. You're doing just more general data warehouse, big data kind of stuff. It's really close split there actually. But 40% around lakehouse, data vault, about 50% just general, more data warehouse. Okay, interesting stuff. We will be doing other webinars actually around these topics as well, so so do keep an eye out on those if they're of interest. And I promise the final little poll question for our session today. Let's launch that one. And again, this one really drives a lot of how we look to take EOS Studio itself forward. I mentioned things like the data catalog, business terms, business glossaries. What we're hearing from a lot of our large customers more and more is they really want the ability to synchronize some of these things between a data modeling tool, but also back into the catalog And some of the common ones that we get feedback on are up there, but there's quite a mix of those out there. Okay, that's quite interesting actually. So we got about 40+% on Calibra, quite a big chunk, about 20% on Informatica, and then about 10% on Purview, and then a lot of others really on perhaps others or not quite implementing yet. It's interesting that Informatica's up there as a very popular choice. Okay, right, I'm going to close that one off as well. And I promise that's the end of the little polls that we're going to do. So let's go back to my slideshow here. And the one thing that I always mean to say, and I sometimes forget, is we are recording the session, and afterwards you should get one or more emails from us with a little follow-up, and basically just saying click here to view the recording or share the recording. So yeah, we will be recording it and sharing it. Okay, sorry, just clicking the buttons again there. So let's go in and have a look at what we can actually do in terms of your studio and hierarchical data, and in particular JSON data as well. I'll go through these probably fairly quickly, and then we'll go into the tool itself and actually start doing some of this stuff. So if we look at a logical data model, typically it'll be represented something like this. This is just a screenshot from our tool set, but again, most data modeling solutions will really be offering something similar. I've got a number of entities or objects. They've got some fields defined in there, and there's some relationships. And often you'll find that you also have a physical data model, which looks very similar. It might look identical. It might have a few differences. We might have some things at just a physical layer, which are more technical or control related, that we don't want to appear at the logical, but they're probably going to look similar. And with most modeling tools, the main difference between physical and logical models, the physical model is aware of the platform. So this is where we can actually look at things like underlying code, whether that's DDL or, as we'll see in a moment, JSON. And it's also where things like storage parameters that are specific to the physical implementation can be set as well. Now, how does that compare if we start looking at something like a JSON structure? So first thing is really that JSON is a fairly flat structure in terms of it's a file, or I say it's a file. It does, it's typically stored in a file. It's typically text-based, but within there it might have a hierarchy. So this is a really simple example where we've got a book object defined here. Sorry, I'm talking about it and not pointing my mouse on it. We've got a book, and in fact, I've probably got my little. Bear with me a second. This will probably just help me a little bit. So up here we've got kind of, just to make it clear, we've got something defined that we're calling a book object, and it's got some fields defined within it. So we've got a title, we've got an author. Now, as part of that hierarchy, we're also saying that book actually has some chapters defined within it as well. And again, the chapter has some fields, and then a chapter might well have some sections. So you'll see here it's basically forming a kind of an indented hierarchy within the JSON file here. So this is a little bit different really to how we've just seen things are represented typically in a modeling tool with things like objects and relationships and defining those between them in terms of entities and tables. So how can we actually represent and work with these things in a modeling tool? Well, if we have a look here, and I'll just move on. What you'll see within your studio is that we have implemented JSON as a platform for physical data models. So in fact, the logical model itself can be the same to all intents and purposes. In fact, it is the same in many cases. It doesn't have to change. But the physical data model, here we can actually represent the structures within it. Now you'll see the notation, if you're kind of really kind of paying attention and got good eyesight, the notation's a little bit different here. And that's because we're representing these as what are called containment relationships. So what we're really saying here, if we look back at our JSON file, we had a book, and the book contained chapters. So this containment relationship is indicating that a book contains chapters and a chapter contains sections. So it's very similar and very natural to work with if you're used to using a data modeling tool like EOS Studio, but there's a few little differences in how things are represented. And in fact, the other thing you'll see that we can then do with it is there's some specific options for a JSON based physical data model, which allow us to represent that in a more hierarchical form directly. So here again, we've now got that concept of the book in place. Again, I've got my little drawing tool here. We've got the same kind of indents that we had earlier. So we kind of got our chapter and our section, and the book up at the top there as well. So that same kind of indented hierarchical format that we saw earlier. So we're actually able to take that and implement that in EOS Studio in terms of how we're working with the physical data models. And I think this is actually really quite a nice way of doing it. It's pretty cool how we've implemented that. So let's just do one more, and so I'm just going to move that on. There we go. Sorry, my PowerPoint slide didn't want to move on there. So let's actually drop into EOS Studio, and we'll run through a little demonstration of some of these things. Now, what I'm going to try and show is a few different approaches, a few different ways that we can do some of these things. So just quickly explain what I'm going to show you, and I'll try and make this clear as we go through the demonstration as well. I thought I'd start off really with a blank model, and we'll maybe import some JSON. So this might be representing, for example, the fact, if we think back to our slides on enterprise modeling, we might have a physical asset that's defined in JSON, and we still want to start documenting that, bringing it in as part of our overall enterprise data model. So I'm going to import some JSON. We'll take a quick look in there at the relational logical model and also at the JSON model. And then I thought, just to show you how that might then fit into something like how do we then work with maybe something like a data lake or a data vault type structure, and I might go ahead and generate a new physical model from my JSON file onto something like Databricks. We'll then maybe look at perhaps a slightly different approach that can be used in conjunction with this, is that we might already also have some objects defined in our enterprise logical model. We've already been working our logical model for some time now. So it's relational based because originally these things came from our Oracle or a SQL Server database, but I might want to import those objects in from my existing enterprise logical model and actually generate those into a physical JSON model to actually generate some JSON file. And of course, when we're doing this, it's important to kind of map and keep track of these things as well. So I'll also show a little technique in EOS Studio that we have with a diagram called a visual data lineage diagram. That might allow us to actually visually represent the fact that we're moving information from perhaps JSON format into a Databricks format. And then if we've got a little bit of time at the end, I'll maybe just touch on how this same approach also works for things like other hierarchical database platforms, so things like Mongo, which are JSON based, Also things like Google BigQuery, which are still DDL based, but they have concepts of structures and arrays and hierarchies within their record definitions. And we may have a little look at the portal at the end if we get time. Okay. So let's just drop that out of the way and let's go into the tool itself. And while I'm bringing that up, actually, I'm just going to, I was just having a quick look at some of the questions and things. I think Anil's been doing a good job of actually working through those. So I think I'll probably crack on with a bit of the demo, and then we'll spend a bit of time after that actually going through some of the questions that came in as well. So, I think the first thing I said we'd do is we'd start with a blank data model. So here's my blank canvas. There's nothing in here at the moment. What I'm going to do is say, let's go ahead and let's import. Sorry, obviously this is your studio data architect. I'm not going to have time today to kind of guide you through all the different options and so on, but some of them should be fairly obvious here. I'm just going to go to the tools menu, import. I'm going to import from a JSON file. And this is the one that I was working with earlier, so I'm just going to go ahead and say, let's import from that JSON file. I can browse it on my filing system. And what's the platform it's going to be? It's going to be a JSON instance. And I've got a few options. Do I want to create new nested objects for each, or do I want to combine into a single nested object? I'll just do the single one for this one. And we'll take the defaults and say, OK. OK, so it's completed importing the JSON file. I've kept this a fairly simple one just to make it easy to work with. And it's gone ahead and generated both a logical and a physical model for me, so we can see them in here. Okay, so logically, let's just make that look a little bit kind of nicer. It's generated the logical representation of my JSON structure, where in essence it goes back to the slides that we had. We've got that now lower level section which goes into chapters and then feeds into a book. And I think I took this from part of a library system, so it's also got a checkout in this particular model, but that's not too important. Now, if we go through here and have a look at the physical model, it looks pretty different actually, in that everything's been rolled into a single JSON instance, which if you remember in that import option is what I asked for. Now I've got these little hierarchical representations in place here. So I can actually click on these. We can expand and compact them down to make it a bit easier to work with and so on. And of course, if I do open this up, it is going to show me the fields within here. And things like chapter will come through as an array of objects. And what you'll also see here as well, because we're now in this physical data model and it's using JSON as its underlying platform, if I actually click on this tab here behind the object, it's actually showing me the JSON code behind that as well. Okay, so very similar to if we're working with a data model, but we're using JSON as the specific platform for it. Now, the other thing we can do, which again is quite nice because you have the option here, is if I'm doing a lot of work on these things, it can sometimes be easier to actually expand them out again. So if I go into my diagram and object display options, or I can do it from the toolbar at the top, and I go up to objects, there's a little option here which says roll up contained objects. So I'm just going to turn that off here to start with. And again, I think I should be able to apply a layout to that. Let's turn it the other way up this time. Because they're containment objects, that's fine. Yeah. So now what it's actually done in my physical model is it's gone ahead and it's just representing those as separate objects. They're not rolled up within the single object type that we asked it to do for book earlier. So I've still got my chapters. There's my containment relationship, and my chapter contains sections and so on. and it's highlighting the fact that section, so array object, so we can see that highlighted in here, and then the detail. And just like working with any other kind of set of tables, I can go in there, I can add fields and work with them, and so on. Now, the other thing I can do is, of course, generate this as a JSON file again. And the reason I might go ahead and do that is, actually we could make a change, couldn't we? Let's just put in, we do it into the book itself. Let's give that a try. And I'll maybe just add in something like a rating for the book. And we'll maybe just make that just an integer. It can be 1 to 10 or something of that nature. So you'll see we're editing and changing the objects in there. I'm just going to hit Control-R to resize the layout of the object there, so it's now fitting everything on the screen. Now, I've made some changes there, so I might want to regenerate my JSON file. Now, in terms of reusing that and sharing that, I can, of course, utilize our repository. But one of the other things we've added relatively recently into your studio is the option to integrate into things like Git and GitHub. So what I could do is I'm going to connect up to my little Git repository that I've got running up on github.com. I'll just take my defaults there. I'm just going to do a quick test to make sure I can connect to it. We'll clone and update that one. It's okay. And it says it can find the repository. And what I might then do is say, let's go ahead and generate this, but I actually want to generate it out to my Git repository. So I basically took this with my new rating being added in there. So I'm going to add that in here. I could create a new branch for that if I want to, or I can go ahead and just say, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I did this earlier, so it's called physical.json. Yeah, let's go ahead and overwrite it. It's done that. And if I go back and have a look at my GitHub repository, I'll just refresh that. So there's my physical JSON file that's been created for me in here. I've also got some other SQL files that were created from other projects I was working with. But it's just done that. It's just done that now. And of course, using GitHub, we can go in and we can look at the information that's contained in it. So there's my JSON file. So that could now be passed to others to work with. I'm not sure if we're going to have a history with it yet. Okay. And that's when I first added my other sample projects earlier. So that's one that we added in here. Oh, and I added a couple of extra little bits and pieces into that particular one there as well. So nice integration to GitHub that's been added in there as well. Works for SQL files as well as the JSON files. Oh, so the other thing I said I'd do here is, what about if I brought this in and absorbed my kind of JSON structure, but I now actually want to say, okay, ideally we're going to start working with this as part of a larger project in the enterprise. So what I'm actually going to do is say, let's generate a new physical model. And let's call this one this one is going to be utilizing Databricks. And again, I'm just going to take the defaults. It might prompt me to overwrite a few things. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so I've now got a new data model, a new physical data model, Databricks. And again, it's basically utilizing that hierarchical display that we have there, because it recognizes that these are containment relationships from the logical model, and it's generated them within there. And I can now edit this one, bring those up, and now rather than JSON behind it, I've actually got my DDL code with my array structures in place, allow me to work through that. And I could of course go ahead now and start generating the code from there and working with that as well. But the other thing I did mention we could also do was bring things in from an existing model. So what I'm going to do now actually is, if I go back to my logical model that I had up here. So if you remember, this is what we brought in from my JSON file originally. This time what I'm going to do is say, well, let's actually go ahead and connect into my repository, which has got all my existing data models in there. And I'm going to connect to, I think it's my corporate logical model. Yeah, we'll do the corporate logical model. And we'll maybe connect to the product submodel, because a book perhaps could be part of our products that we sell. And I'm going to say OK to that. And there's product. So what this will do is it will show me, here's my existing model. I'll just go to the next step. So I've got a book, a chapter, a checkout, and a section. In my corporate logical model, I've got these other objects already defined. What do I want to do? And again, just for the demo, to keep it simple, maybe I'll say let's bring in some of this product information. That will probably do us for now. So I'm going to bring into my new model that I created from a JSON import. I'm going to say I want to merge in now some information and some objects from my corporate logical model. And if we just go in here and apply that. So we've now got our product, which came from our corporate logical model. And it's got a product inventory, etc., etc. And what I could now start to do is think about, well, how do I actually do a little bit of documentation around this as well? So, well, one thing I could start to do is maybe have a look at, I've got my JSON and I've started to do my implementation mapping here. Maybe let's create a little data model. So we've got Databricks there. In fact, before we do that, let's just push this information here into my Databricks physical model. And again, I'll just say those ones that we selected. So that's my logical model. That's my physical model. Go ahead and finish that. So now my physical Databricks model, again, if I just maybe apply the layout to that, that's got my book object, which came from JSON originally. It's also got my product object, my product category, and product inventory. And I might want to create maybe a new containment relationship. Will that work? I can really give that a go. Oh, sorry, can I do it that way? In there. And then from here, what I could start to do next is look at how we could maybe document this as a lineage flow. So maybe let's just add a new data flow. And this is going to be showing how we came kind of from JSON to Databricks, perhaps. And here now are my physical. Oh, in fact, that's the other thing I was going to do, wasn't it? I was just going to show, apologies. I was going to show one other thing. Model options. Yeah. Let's change that into more of a dimensional model. So it's got kind of fact and dimensional tables. Data lineage. Let's say, here's my information from my JSON model. So I'm just going to drop those out. Let's have a look at what I have in my Databricks model. Actually, we're going to map across to the product. And maybe we'll have product category there as well. So we've got a couple of things. And let's maybe just insert a transformation here. And then we call this JSON to Databricks. And I could then start saying, well, actually, we're going to feed in this information, and it's going to go out to my Databricks. And what we're going to do, well, let's add in some documentation to say we're going to have the ID from the book, and we're maybe going to have the name of the book, and oh, there's any rating, we may as well have that one. From chapter, we're going to have the chapter number only and the heading, and again from the section, we'll just have the section number. And output wise, these are all going to go into my product, so that product mapping, that ID for the book's going to go into product ID. We brought in the name. And what I'd also like though is to store things like a list price for this, and also the product line that it's part of, etc. And I could add a little description in here as well as to what it's doing. And we could maybe say that this is a business rule that's being applied to it. So we're now starting to see these things, and we could perhaps then finally just maybe do a little kind of grouping together using our shapes and say maybe this one is our bronze layer with JSON in there, and I don't know, I'm not very good at picking colors, but we could maybe pick a dark color. Ooh, we didn't quite need it to be that, but never mind. And the same sort of thing here. We could then say this is going into our silver layer, which is Databricks. I'll pick a less horrible one this time around, hopefully. There we go, and we can set things like containment so that these things are then kind of contained within them. So as well as doing the actual comparison and merging of things from, say, starting with a JSON file, bringing it together with objects that came from our enterprise logical data model, we've then here actually started to do a little bit of lineage mapping and lineage documentation to illustrate that actually that JSON stuff is being fed in through this transformation, and it's going to map through to how we're storing these in our model that's going to represent our eventual deployment using Databricks as the back end as well. And the final thing, just to kind of wrap up on some of this stuff here as well, I did mention that we talk a little bit about other hierarchical data stores. I'll just bring this up really quickly here. This is another model that I kind of have from earlier. It's got the same sort of logical layout as the previous one. So we still got our book, our chapter, our section. But I did mention that we do a similar support, not just for JSON. So you know, this is looking at it. It's got a bit more information in this one. So that's our JSON representation. I can also have a Mongo type implementation. So Mongo is a database that uses JSON behind it. So you'll see it's a little bit different from pure JSON in that it has these underscore IDs as a primary key and everything. So this would actually generate me a Mongo compliant JSON script from there, or even things like Google BigQuery, where here it's showing us, you know, similar to what we saw with Databricks. It's hierarchical still, so books, chapters, these are array records, and so on. And that same kind of support with the containment relationships operates and works, you know, for the different platforms which support that hierarchical database. I think Postgres is another one that supports arrays in here also. So, you know, with your studio, we really, I think the architect team and the development team put quite a bit of work into try and make working with the JSON objects very seamless in terms of a data modeling tool by implementing it as an additional platform. And that does then allow us to use all the good things that your studio already does, compare and merge to bring information together, bring objects from different models, from our enterprise logical model, importing it from a JSON file, and be able to work with it all in a very nice and effective way. And of course, you know, as we touched on earlier, probably the last thing I'll just really quickly show in the demonstration, and then we'll have a quick scan through some of the questions. All of this stuff can also be published out to more of a web interface as well. So I think I've got that little example that we're looking at there. So here, for example, if I look at, there's my, let's have a look at the Google BigQuery one actually. So you'll see here that we've got little hierarchical kind of instances of the submodels. I've then got my JSON model, I've got my Google BigQuery model. You can maybe drill into that one. And that will kind of render that into HTML. Apologies, it's on a slight go slow there today. There we go. So we can see these things also published out into our portal, so people can come and browse them. It's got really nice searching capabilities. It's read-only, so I can't actually edit it, but I can click on it. So I could go into book, and that's going to then load up the information associated with book. And this is all coming from my from my data model as well. So you'll see here, there's all my columns, all my information. I can see all of that in there too. Okay, and I think there was a question there about we did look at the MongoDB support, but I'll maybe come back to that if we want to as well. So I'm just going to take a pause and have a look through the questions that have been coming in. So bear with me while I just bring that up on my side here. I really don't know why that wants to come to the front all the time, but we'll just pop that out of the way. So I think Anil's been doing a really good job of answering all those as they've gone along. So there's a few at the end there. And Anil, if you've got any kind of ones that you think are particular interest, actually there's a good one there, Anil. I don't know if you want to kind of read that question out and answer it. There's a question about JSON as a data type with Oracle 21c and so on.
Yes.
I think it has answered that. Do you just want to quickly explain that as well, Anil? So I think that's a really, really good question.
Yeah, so basically, there are some current data types that are available in the Oracle database. So like, for example, JSON object, merge path, JSON serialize, all those things are there. We just need to include it in our tool as the data type supported type. So that is probably going to be in an upcoming release.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something that we're very much aware of. It looks like it's becoming very important, and you're seeing messaging from Oracle and some of the other large platform vendors that, you know, this is going to be a big thing for them going forward. So we'll absolutely be looking at how we can best support that. Cool. Other quick questions there. I'll just rattle through as well as I'm reading them. Can we show Mongo with JSON? I did bring that up really quickly, but if you want to see it again as I'm talking, which is probably a mistake, but I'll kind of bring that up there. So this is a MongoDB model. It's got Mongo behind it. I can go into any of these objects, and I'm using my repository here, so it's just popping up with have I got information behind it. So there's the JSON that's going to be generated from Mongo. There's my fields that are stored in there. Or I could say, let's go ahead and generate the full script for it and select everything. I'll just do a quick preview. So there it's telling us that this is your studio generated for MongoDB. And then there's the JSON with the collections that we're going to work with the Mongo database. What license type do I need to use and import JSON? The JSON supports just a platform. If you're not familiar with your studio, it comes in things like Base Data Architect. It comes in an Enterprise Team Edition. Base Data Architect is able to support the platform, so you could utilize JSON with that as long as you have a multi-platform license or a single platform JSON license. Would I be right in saying that a physical model can only be generated from a logical model? Kind of, yes. What I mean by that is if I go back to the one that I was working with here, so we had this one. So I've got a logical model here, which has got all this information in there. Now, every kind of modeling project in your studio has to have a logical model. It's just historically, it always has to be there. It doesn't have to have anything in it. So you could actually, not do any work with it. So like here, I think, this is a blank, completely blank project. I could just literally drop something down like a dummy entity. I could say generate a physical model. Yep, let's go ahead and do it. And we'll do that. Could call it any platform we want. We could just make that a generic one if we want to. Finish it there. I could then come back. Actually, I should be able to just delete that from my logical model. So the logical model is blank, and I can then just work on the physical model and basically use that with things like compare and merge and so on to compare to other physical models and work with it that way. So you can work at the physical layer quite effectively within there. So we've got one there.
So John, there's one here on, can you demonstrate generating a physical MongoDB or JSON from a normalized logical? I think that's what you just did, or?
Did we do that?
Well, basically we can take the library example. Yeah.
The logical one there, I mean, that can be in any kind of, from here, I can generate that to any physical platform that my license supports. So I just say generate a physical model. I did it for JSON, and I think I did it for Databricks, but we could generate that for a Mongo implementation as well. MongoDB there. And again, some options. What I'll just say yes, go ahead and do it. And there's now my Mongo physical model. And again, I can go in and start working with that just like the others. Okay, lots of other things. Just getting towards time as well. I did see one about, can I demonstrate integration to Calibra? I'd say that's a topic in its own right, actually, and we have done webinars on that previously. So the recordings will be up on our website, and we'll also be doing some more of those things with Calibra, Purview, and similar. But basically, the models from your studio can be published up to Calibra, and things like business terms and business glossaries can be synchronized and mapped between them as well. So it's quite a nice integration that we've built there, but that's really something for a session in its own right.
And I think here's a very interesting question here, John, is that we have Ab initio as our metadata repository. So will all the new platforms like JSON be exported and imported into Ab initio as with other data platforms?
So the JSON is just a platform.
Yeah.
So as we saw, we can generate that JSON file either out as just a file onto disk, or we can generate to GitHub. So if Ab initio is able to pick it up and import it, then yeah, absolutely, you can do that just as you would with any code or any other JSON generation tool. We're not doing anything special with that there. Showing the JSON schema generation. Let me do that from this one because I lost track of where we were. But that would be that's a JSON model here that I have. If we want to generate a complete JSON schema, I know it says generate database there. I keep kind of having a little go at them about that because it should just say kind of generate JSON from in here. But you get a few options. So it's telling me that it's a JSON platform. It's got this thing called library here that it's found. And I want to do it as a JSON instance or as a JSON schema, and I then get other options in here. And then I can either just preview it. So that's the generation that's been done there. Or if I click finish, I think I do it as if I've done my file there, if I click the finish button, it would actually generate that out as a JSON file as well. Okay.
Yep, I think we're
coming up to time.
Yeah, we're out of time too. Yeah.
Covered most of those questions, I think. Sorry, excuse me. So let me just quickly finish off, and I'm going to skip over the summary bit there. Loads of good information up on our website. We have moved a lot of resources across to just eosstudio.com to make it a bit easier to find than trawling through the whole idea.com website. So take a look up there. Technical documentation is on here, and there's also a load of videos either in the Resource Center or on YouTube. Sorry, I was just thinking what I was going to say there. Oh, if you didn't notice it, the slide deck is available as a handout from GoToWebinar. You should be able to click and download that directly now. So that'll have things like these links in there and the other information that I went through. Otherwise, I think really we've kind of come to the end of time for today, so I'm going to stop it here. If there's anything that you want to ask about further, then do feel free just to email that email address there, sales@idea.com, and they will contact you back. They can put you in touch with people like myself or Anil. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good day or a good evening, depending where you are in the world.